Donald Trump is dominating the field in the Republican presidential race, but obviously Trump is a controversy-generating machine, and some Republicans feel his name at the top of the ballot could actually harm GOP candidates down below. Congressional candidates find themselves wondering whether to back Trump or distance themselves from the man who could end up as their presidential nominee. Let's bring in our panel. Republican strategist David Avella, GOPAC chairman, and Democratic strategist Basil Smikle. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
David, what would you say to a candidate who is on the fence about whether to embrace Donald Trump and his candidacy, or perhaps try and keep his or her distance?
There's no question the presidential race will frame the discussion, John, but more important in these down-ballot races are the candidates and the ideas they're running on and the campaigns they run. As Senator Mitch McConnell reminded his Senate colleagues, he won in 1996 successfully in Kentucky as President Clinton was going on to get a commanding win as he was reelected president. Just as Senator Collins was able to be reelected in 2008 as President Obama was winning 58% of the vote in Maine. So before the Democrats start looking for majority offices in the Senate and House, we ought to have an election first.
All right, Basil, what do you think about that advice?
Well, they're nice offices, let's say that. But I think actually David's right in one sense that, you would have a lot of voters looking at the top of the ticket and may split it. They may think of their president in their vote differently from, let's say, a member of Congress or a council member or a state legislator. That is definitely true, but I think what the Republicans need to be concerned about, and I believe that Democrats will certainly capitalize on this, is being able to tie Donald Trump and his language to the misogynistic comments related to women, to comments related to communities of color. And while I think it may work in some areas, I don't think that has wide support. And I think if Democrats can tie that language not just to his candidacy but to the rest of the ticket, then I think you'll start to see a lot of folks looking at the Democratic ticket when they go to the polls.
David, you might have seen it already, but let me read for you a piece from the New York Times today that encapsulates some Republican concerns. Nominating Mr. Trump, it says, could create a political battlefield of extraordinary breadth and volatility. Polling shows that he would enter the general election trailing badly against Hillary Clinton, and he has become deeply unpopular outside of his white, heavily male political base. While Mr. Trump would most likely draw throngs of white working-class voters in Democratic-leaning states like Michigan and Ohio, he would also drive away women, non-whites, and voters with college degrees in conservative-leaning states like Georgia and North Carolina. So if you're a Republican office seeker, how do you balance those two, the push and pull of Donald Trump?
John, it's as we were discussing, ultimately these candidates have to put out their ideas and what they want to do if elected to members of Congress. I saw that article today and I had to chuckle because can either of the two of you name a time when a party without candidates was able to take a majority? And if you look at where filing deadlines have occurred, Democrats haven't even filed candidates in many of the races that they could make competitive. So in order to take a majority, first you have to have candidates. Add to it, there's a number of their candidates who are equally in trouble of losing and making it even harder for Democrats to take over. You can't beat somebody with nobody. And even, let me give you one more stat. At the state level where there's state legislative candidates, and we're talking about down ballot, 45% of Republicans or Democrat incumbents have no one running against them. So these races, as we've been talking, these are all individual races, certainly framed by the presidential race in the messaging. But each candidate's going to have to run their own campaign.
Let's talk about somebody named Clinton, not the candidate Clinton, but the former president. After he was elected in '92, he did not have a particularly auspicious first couple of years, and the voters retaliated by handing the control of the House over to the Republicans. Basil, I mean, could that kind of thing? Republicans obviously like their their majority in the House and the Senate right now. Could they lose it if voters don't like the guy at the top of the ticket?
Well, I certainly would argue that they can. I mean, we have another New Yorker in Senator Schumer who could be the next majority leader of the Senate, and we would love to see that opportunity take hold. But I do think that, as David mentioned earlier, the candidate running at the top of the ticket sets the tone. When you go to the conventions, it's that candidate and a few others that actually create the platform that the party will run on in the general election. And so we're going to be looking at, Democrats are going to be looking at, how are the Republicans going to balance a lot of what they had said, particularly after 2012, when they had this sort of autopsy that talked about bringing in more women, bringing in more voters of color, embracing immigration reform. When all of that was discussed then, but the person at the top of your ticket has basically thrown all of that out the window.
I know David's trying to jump in, but I think he wants to tell you have to fill some candidate slots.
We'll do that. I am not worried about that at all.
But John, it was also interesting. You mentioned the losses of Republicans under President Clinton. That was 2 years after he'd been elected. Let's have one election first before we start talking about midterm elections.
David Avella, Basil, Smikle. Thank you both.